This image is familiar to anyone who follows global news and technology. A perfect mirrored wall, ruthlessly slicing through the red sands of the Arabian Peninsula. We are shown the absolute triumph of engineering and trillion-dollar capital. It seems that the city of the future has already taken shape, frozen in anticipation of its first inhabitants. But the smooth glass of the facades is adept at concealing the truth. If you mute the sound of the commercials and look at the dry construction reports, the hologram begins to flicker.
The reality of the NEOM mega project has turned out to be far harsher than the glossy presentations at Swiss economic forums.
Huge excavators are bogged down in the soil and sit idle due to logistical breakdowns. Allocated budgets are burning through at such an incredible rate that they frighten even investors accustomed to luxury. It is important to understand that NEOM is not just a city or an experimental settlement for the wealthy. It is a heavyweight instrument of geopolitical power that has been attempted to be used to override the laws of physics and economics.
It is a desperate, almost physiological experiment by an entire country to perform an organ transplant in the face of the impending death of the old oil model.
By the end of this story, you will understand the true cost of such architectural mutations. You will see how a $500 billion project slowly turns into a trap for its own creators. It will become clear why even unlimited access to money does not guarantee victory over gravity and logistical chaos. But to understand this, we must return to the very beginning of the story, to a time when there were no contracts, no contractors, and no boundless geopolitical ambitions, to the absolute zero point where only the scorching wind, silence, and the dead stone of the desert existed. The land in the province of Tabuk in northwestern Saudi Arabia is openly hostile to any complex biological life. These are vast expanses of scorched rock, salt flats, and red sand, where summer temperatures easily exceed 50 degrees. The air here is so dry that sweat evaporates from the skin instantly, leaving only a thin crust of salt. There are no natural sources of fresh water in this area capable of sustaining even a small traditional town. The choice of this territory for the construction of a metropolis was not dictated by the logic of survival or the convenience of transportation routes. It was a decision made solely on the level of political symbolism and the desire to conquer an empty map. The desert was perceived not as a complex ecosystem with its own rules, but as a blank sheet of paper.
On this sheet, one could draw any geometric shape without regard for the terrain.
It was precisely the absence of old infrastructure that seemed to be the main advantage for the project's initiators. There was no need to demolish old neighborhoods, negotiate with the local population, or relocate ancient utilities. The space appeared utterly submissive, ready to absorb any volume of concrete and steel. But this emptiness was illusory, and it concealed within itself the environment's colossal resistance. The desert does not forgive linear and rigid forms. It demands flexibility and adaptation.
Any barrier in the path of the wind inevitably becomes the center of sand dune formation.
Any exposed surface heats up to temperatures at which cable insulation begins to melt. The engineers were about to face the fact that emptiness has its own immense physical weight. Long before the first blueprints appeared, the future city was already doomed to a daily battle with the climate. What was needed was not just buildings, but a self-sustaining, space-grade life support system on the Earth's surface. Every drop of water, every degree of coolness here had to be produced by burning colossal amounts of energy. From the outset, the territory presented the project with a bill that could not be paid in a single installment. The idea of creating NEOM was born not out of an excess of prosperity, but out of a deep existential fear. The country's leadership clearly saw the approaching end of the hydrocarbon era, which had sustained the monarchy for decades. Oil was losing its status as an absolute weapon, and with it, the guarantee of future stability was fading. It was urgent to create a new gravitational anomaly that would attract global capital after the shift away from gasoline. Old cities like Riyadh or Jeddah were categorically unsuitable for this role. They were too cramped, too conservative, and too tied to traditional bureaucracy. The new economy required a new entity, completely isolated from the old systems of governance and laws.
Thus emerged the concept of an advanced development zone, with its own legislation, taxes, and even a judicial system.
The scale of the ambition had to be such as to paralyze critical thinking among potential investors. That is precisely why a budget of $500 billion was chosen, a figure bordering on the absurd for a single project. It was a financial shock tactic designed to show that the kingdom was ready to go all in. The investment was intended to guarantee that the project simply had no right to fail. The crowning achievement of this idea was the Line, a concept for a linear city 170 kilometers long. The architects proposed housing millions of people within two gigantic parallel walls, cutting through the landscape from the mountains to the sea. It was a decision that completely ignored humanity's millennia-long experience in building radial and organic settlements.
The city was transformed into a rigid algorithm, a monolithic microchip imprinted on the planet's surface.
The project was developed under tight time constraints dictated by the political calendar. Blueprints were approved at an unprecedented speed, and approval stages were reduced to a minimum. No one wanted to hear about technical limitations or the need for years of geological surveys. The idea began to take on a life of its own, demanding immediate physical realization at any cost. The early years of NEOM were an era of total informational dominance and the production of digital illusions. Flawless renderings played on screens around the world, showing happy people strolling through glass corridors surrounded by greenery. The image was so detailed and appealing that the line between reality and computer graphics began to blur.
The project wasn't selling square footage. It was selling a ready-made sense of belonging to a superior civilization.
To maintain this illusion, an entire army of the best Western consultants, architects, and marketers was hired. They received salaries many times higher than the market average, and their main task was to generate confidence. In their posh offices, thousands of pages of presentations were created, describing flying taxis and an artificial moon. No one in those offices asked uncomfortable questions about exactly how this would work in reality. The simulation of success required constant fuel in the form of bold statements and new sensational announcements. When interest in the line waned slightly, the public was immediately presented with the Trojena ski resort in the tropics. As if that weren't enough, the Oxagon floating industrial complex was announced, defying the laws of hydrodynamics.
The project swelled with new concepts like a sponge, hiding the lack of basic engineering solutions behind its flashy facades.
This phase was absolutely necessary to set the mechanism for attracting external capital in motion. Investors had to believe that they were investing in an already underway, irreversible process of historic proportions. The bandwagon effect was supposed to compel major funds to pour money into the project, simply out of fear of missing out on profits. The illusion of solidity was carefully shielded from any contact with the grime of the actual construction site. But the simulation has one critical flaw. It consumes enormous resources without producing a physical product. Millions of dollars were spent on consulting services and the creation of endless 3D models of non-existent buildings. On the surface, the project looked like a monumental colossus, striding confidently toward a bright future. Inside, however, it was a fragile structure consisting solely of promises, contracts, and inflated expectations. The moment when the virtual lines on the blueprints turned into real trenches became the first point of no return. To build the foundation for the linear city, it was necessary to move astronomical volumes of rock and sand. Thousands of excavators, bulldozers, and dump trucks were hauled into the desert from all over the world, creating the largest mechanized armada. But as soon as the bucket teeth sank into the ground, the illusion of omnipotence shattered against the resistance of matter. The soil in Tabuk turned out to be layered, unpredictable, and extremely difficult to excavate on a large scale. In some places, the machinery got stuck in soft sand. In others, it ran into basalt slabs that required blasting. Dust from the massive construction site rose dozens of meters into the air, clogging engine filters and rendering the machines inoperable. The pace of the excavation work lagged catastrophically behind the rosy schedules drawn up in London offices. It turned out that the very geometric concept of a continuous straight line created insurmountable obstacles for the movement of equipment. To haul rock out of the central part of the excavation, dump trucks had to make a detour of tens of kilometers. The tracks for construction equipment were collapsing under the weight of the loaded vehicles faster than they could be repaired. Friction, gravity, and simple metal fatigue began to eat away at the project's timeline at an exponential rate. Even perfect coordination could not negate the fact that the Earth is spherical. Over a distance of 170 kilometers, the curvature of the planet amounts to several meters, which undermined the very idea of a perfectly flat wall. Engineers had to recalculate tolerances on the fly, throwing chaos into the already approved blueprints for the basic structures. The perfect straight line, which looked so beautiful on paper, began to bend and deform in reality. Physics took ruthless revenge for the attempt to ignore its laws during the conceptual planning phase. Every meter of excavation into the rock required an exponential increase in diesel fuel consumption and man-hours. The Earth resisted the crude intrusion, proving that it was not merely an abstract backdrop for architectural fantasies. The scale of the resistance proved so great that it began to destabilize the very foundation of the construction. The construction of the megacity gave rise to a problem that the project's initiators had underestimated at the very earliest stage. To erect the walls of the future, it was first necessary to build an entire invisible city for those who would erect them. More than 100,000 workers, engineers, and managers at various levels had to be brought into the empty desert. This gigantic army had to be fed, watered, treated, and provided with acceptable living conditions on a daily basis. A paradoxical situation arose. The infrastructure for the builders began to consume resources intended for the project itself. Workers' camps grew to the size of small metropolises, requiring the construction of their own roads and power grids. The demand for fresh water skyrocketed, forcing the accelerated construction of temporary desalination plants along the coast. The logistical arteries feeding the construction site were clogged with convoys of trucks carrying food and drinking water. The delivery of construction materials turned into a logistical nightmare on a global scale. Pouring the foundations required millions of tons of cement and rebar, which had to be shipped in from other countries. The region's seaports simply could not handle such a flow of dry cargo ships. Vessels sat in the roadstead for weeks awaiting unloading. Any delay at customs or a storm at sea instantly halted work across many kilometers of the excavation site. The supply system began to suffer serious breakdowns, turning into a giant clot in the body of the project. Lines of trucks stretched to the horizon, and fuel was wasted simply from sitting in traffic jams. Disruptions in the supply rhythm led to concrete hardening in the mixers and cranes sitting idle. The complexity of the system exceeded the capabilities of human management, creating chaos at every stage of the chain. The management team responded to these disruptions in the only way it knew how, by increasing the number of contractors. The interests of hundreds of companies intersected at the construction site, each trying to grab a slice of the logistics pie. This led to duplication of functions, shifting of responsibility, and colossal financial losses. The construction mechanism became bogged down in its own sluggishness, unable to process the necessary volumes of material. As the first test structures were erected, theoretical risks began to turn into real technical disasters. The concept of a facade clad entirely in mirrored glass proved to be a fatal mistake in the desert environment. The architects wanted to create an effect of invisibility, blending the building into the landscape, but they created a perfect thermal trap. Sunlight, reflecting off the gigantic surfaces, began to focus on the surrounding areas. Temperatures in the areas of reflected light reached critical levels, melting plastic and killing all vegetation. Instead of the promised climatic oasis, the walls formed a deadly heat corridor around themselves. Engineers had to urgently seek solutions to mat the glass or change its angle of inclination. But any interference with the original design undermined the very aesthetic essence of the mirrored monolith, for which the entire project had been conceived. The aerodynamics of such a massive structure presented the project's creators with yet another unpleasant surprise. The 500-meter-high wall became an artificial mountain range, an insurmountable barrier to air masses. Winds that had previously swept freely across the desert now crashed against the facade, creating powerful turbulent vortices at the base. These vortices whipped tons of sand into the air, forming localized dust storms right at the city's entrances. In addition, the change in wind patterns affected the microclimate of the entire region in unpredictable ways. In some places, zones of complete calm and hot air accumulation formed, while in others, zones of constant drafts emerge. The pressure difference between the shaded and sunny sides of the building began to create physical stress within the structural framework itself. The city's massive structure began to experience loads for which its steel ribs were not designed. Nature resisted the intrusion of this foreign object by every means at its disposal. Migratory birds crashed into invisible mirrored barriers by the thousands, creating unsanitary conditions and requiring constant cleaning of the facades. Every day of operation of the test sections proved that maintaining this illusion would cost astronomical sums. The project proved incapable of coexisting harmoniously with the environment. It could only aggressively suppress it. The stated budget of $500 billion had long seemed like an inexhaustible ocean of liquidity. However, the real cost of implementing untested technologies under extreme conditions began to rise rapidly. It turned out that the initial estimates had been drawn up without accounting for global inflation in construction materials and logistical complications. Every meter of tunnel laid cost 3 to 4 times more than planned during the phase of glossy presentations. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the project's main donor, began to experience a serious shortage of available cash. To pay the contractors' endless bills, the fund had to start selling off part of its international assets. The global investment climate had changed, and free Western capital was in no hurry to flow into a risky, long-delayed construction project in the middle of the desert. A classic cash flow gap loomed, where current expenses exceeded incoming funds. Rumors of financial problems began to seep through the high walls of the construction camps into the business press. Foreign partners began demanding 100% prepayment for equipment, factoring their risks into the price. This further fueled the spiral of spending, turning the project into a black hole for the state budget. NEOM began siphoning money from other important domestic programs of the kingdom, becoming a toxic asset. Management tried to hide the scale of the financial hemorrhage behind a facade of nonstop PR and new announcements. They announced the creation of their own airlines and the purchase of premium sports brands to maintain their status. But the math is inexorable. If expenditures consistently exceed projections, the system is headed for bankruptcy. The money supply, intended to defy the laws of physics, found itself subject to the laws of economics. For the first time in the kingdom's history, there was talk of the need to take out large-scale international loans specifically for construction needs. This was a signal that internal reserves had been exhausted, and the project could no longer be sustained solely by oil windfalls. Pride gave way to the pragmatism of survival amid the most severe liquidity shortage. The megacity, conceived as a generator of future profits, turned into a giant pump draining the present. The accumulated technical and financial problems inevitably led to a systemic management crisis within NEOM. The deadlines for the first phases, originally set for the end of the decade, began to shift inexorably to the right. Division heads found themselves caught between the physical impossibility of meeting the plan and political pressure from above demanding results. The atmosphere at headquarters shifted from euphoric to paranoid. A quiet but massive turnover of personnel began at the highest levels of project management. Foreign top managers, realizing the inevitability of the failure of the initial plans, preferred to resign, taking substantial severance packages. They left behind unresolved problems and empty promises, which fell on the shoulders of new, even more bewildered directors. The lack of institutional memory meant that the same mistakes were repeated over and over. The pressure of political accountability forced middle managers to falsify reports on the work done. Optimistic reports on cubic meters of poured concrete were sent up the chain, while downtime and defects flourished on the ground. The management team had lost touch with the physical reality of the project, relying solely on the attractive charts in their presentations. When the true extent of the delays came to light, it sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of the monarchy. It became clear that building 170 kilometers of the city within the stated time frame was absolutely impossible. Even if trillions of dollars could be found, there simply isn't enough manufacturing capacity in the world. The system was overwhelmed by its own scale. It began to suffocate from a lack of managerial oxygen and material resources. A collapse was looming, threatening to bury the reputation of the entire country under the rubble. An immediate, radical solution was needed, one capable of halting the descent and maintaining at least the appearance of control over the situation. Continuing to follow the original plan meant guaranteed to hit a wall at full speed. The leadership faced the most difficult choice in the project's entire history. The time had come to make painful cuts to save what could still be saved. The operation to save the mega project was conducted in the strictest secrecy, without any high-profile press releases. The plan to build a 170-kilometer linear city was ruthlessly but quietly amputated. Internal directives reduced the length of the first phase to a modest 2.5 kilometers, postponing the rest indefinitely. This was not merely a revision of schedules, it was an admission of surrender to the laws of the material world. To divert attention from this colossal concession, the focus of PR campaigns shifted sharply to local projects. Suddenly, the construction of an elite yacht club on Sandala Island and the preparation of ski slopes in Trojan were touted as the main achievements. These projects, though technically complex, were quite understandable and feasible within the framework of standard global practice. The utopian vision had shrunk to the scale of an exclusive resort for the ultra-wealthy. Architectural concepts underwent a rigorous review to reduce costs and accelerate construction. Many innovative but untested life support technologies had to be quietly abandoned in favor of standard solutions. The invisible infrastructure of the future was replaced by ordinary pipes, cables, and reinforced concrete piles. The project was saved by cutting out the very uniqueness for which it was conceived. The price of this rescue turned out to be enormous. NEOM lost its revolutionary aura. It ceased to be a response to humanity's global challenges and became just another exorbitantly expensive construction project in the Middle East. Investors got the message loud and clear. Ambitions were scaled back, the fairy tales were over, and a fierce battle for a return on investment had begun. Trust in grandiose statements had been undermined, and now every move by management was scrutinized with skepticism. The rescued project survived, but lost its original integrity and meaning. It turned into a patchwork quilt of disparate tourist and industrial zones, united only by a common logo. Surgical intervention averted immediate death from financial exhaustion, but left the project crippled. This new, truncated form proved far more vulnerable to criticism than the original grandiose illusion. Today, NEOM's construction sites represent a grandiose, pulsating monument to compromise. These are vast territories scarred by heavy machinery, where entirely mundane, albeit massive, concrete structures are being erected. Utopia collided with reality and lost, leaving behind hundreds of kilometers of abandoned trenches in places where construction will never reach. The mega project exists, but it exists as a perpetual infrastructure problem requiring daily financial injections. The system has become a hostage to its own past promises, which cannot be publicly revoked. The authorities are forced to continue funding even the most controversial sections, because halting construction would mean geopolitical collapse. NEOM has turned into a handleless suitcase of monumental proportions. It is incredibly heavy to carry, but abandoning it is deadly dangerous for the country's reputation. Every $1,000 invested only increases the weight of this millstone around the neck of the national economy. The project's new architecture no longer promises to save the planet from its carbon footprint. On the contrary, the construction of these scaled-down versions consumes millions of tons of the dirtiest material to produce: cement. The energy needed to power construction camps and desalinate water is still generated by burning traditional fossil fuels. The project consumes the very resource from which it was meant to free the country. This is no longer a breakthrough into post-capitalism. It is a desperate attempt to diversify revenue at any cost. The hotels and resorts that have been built will compete for wealthy tourists, offering them a high level of service instead of a new civilizational paradigm. The system's internal fragility has not disappeared. It has simply shifted from a global to an operational scale. Behind the facade of glass and steel now lies the fear of losing invested capital. The project has learned to survive under constant stress, but it has lost its ability to inspire. The city's body is scarred by engineering modifications, financial cutbacks, and changes in management teams. It stands on the sand not as a monument to the future, but as proof that even the greatest wealth has its limits. It is a complex mechanism, overburdened with compromises, doomed to an eternal struggle with the desert for the right to exist. Look again at those perfect renderings, where the glass wall stretches beyond the horizon, reflecting red sunsets. Now you know that this is not a mirror showing our tomorrow, but a blank screen hiding the truth. Behind this smooth surface lies a story of colossal physical and financial friction, a story of a struggle against gravity, sand, and human nature. All that remains of the creator's initial audacity is the heavy concrete necessity to finish building at least something so as not to lose face. We see how an idea, not designed for the scale of the physical world, collapses under its own weight. Ambition and power possess a very real, crushing mass that grinds the steel cogs of logistics and budget constraints into dust. The salvation of the utopia turned into its transformation into ordinary commercial development, only unprecedentedly expensive and complex. The symbol of future independence became a heavy anchor, dragging the economy of an entire country to the bottom. The desert patiently reclaims what is hers, seeping sand into the mechanisms and drying up the rivers of funding. The history of this mega city is a harsh lesson that the true price of grandeur is always paid in hidden destruction. The illusion of control over nature and the economy lives on in presentation slides, but on construction sites, only the laws of physics apply, and those laws know no mercy.